Hi, Nance. I hope this encounter is one you want to narrate. Now, I'm not the type to get spooked easily out in the woods by anything. Back in my 20s, I spent several months helping my brother build his dream homestead up in the wilds of Alaska. And since then, I have spent many seasons up there hunting with him. I've also hunted in Canada and many places throughout the United States. I think I've ran into every large animal on the continent. Now that I've ran into Bigfoot, I know I can say that with a little more authority. But I get ahead of myself. Anyway, back in 2016, I had gone to Lake Vesuvius to do a little fishing. I settled my 23-foot Arctic Fox pool camper into the Iron Ridge camping area and then headed off to do some fishing. I caught a few bass that I was allowed to keep and got my 5 for the day by early afternoon and headed back to the camper. I iced down 4 of the fish to take home and cooked the 5th in a pan over the fire outside. After eating, I cleaned up and settled into an hour or 2 of poking the fire until I got tired. I turned in and fell asleep with the windows on either side of the bed open as it was a nice night. Now, something that seemed as loud as one of those old factory whistles blasted me out of the bed, and I was now wide awake. I'm pretty sure I woke up yelling, what, into the air, in my confusion as I scrambled out of bed. Now, I didn't know what had happened, or what I had heard, or if I had really heard anything at all, or if I just dreamed it. I was sitting on the edge of the bed, trying to think it through, when I realized a very dark shape moved away from the window by the bed. I didn't realize it had been there. The window had just been dark when I woke up. But once it moved, I became aware of the slight lightening of the darkness at the window. Now that didn't make sense, because you see, from outside, I knew my camper was about 11 feet high, and the bottom of the window by the bed was probably close to 6 feet off the ground. This meant a tall person could peek in at the bottom of the window on their tiptoes, but they weren't going to see very much. So how had something covered that window and moved away? I told myself it must be a tree branch moving in the shadow it was casting from the stars or the moon. I also told myself that I was just all jumbled up from being half asleep still, and I wasn't thinking straight. Now, I want to add that at the Iron Ridge campground, I was in site number 16, which has no one directly next to you and no one across from you. I have been here many times, and I choose this spot every time if it's available because it is so private and secluded. So I knew instantly that there shouldn't be any other campers close enough to me to have made the noise that woke me, unless they had walked over from the other sites nearby and were standing right outside my camper. I decided to go have a look, because, it isn't unheard of for your vehicle to be broken into in a campground. I got a flashlight and my baseball bat. I did have a gun in the camper, but at that point, I didn't feel there was enough of a threat to get that. I was not going to shoot someone for breaking in my truck. I would, however, make them feel the pain of their mistake if I had to. I shined the light from the window sideways, across the camper steps to the door, and down the side as much as I could. I didn't see anyone waiting to ambush me. So cautiously, I stepped out and went to look around, focusing mostly on my truck. I had the truck keys ready to hit the panic alarm to scare someone off if I had to. In hindsight, yes, I can see where I've made 100 errors and I should have done things a little differently. But I'm getting ahead of myself again. I started to walk around my truck and I shone the flashlight under the truck as well, making sure no one was hiding. Then I walked near the edge where the tree line started and flashed the light all around. I was looking for not just someone hiding, but were any branches moving? Was anything there that might tell me that someone had been there? But I found nothing. Nothing was moving. I saw nothing. I heard nothing. Until I walked back to my truck, that is. As I came around the front of the truck, I came almost parallel to the driver's side door, and I stopped dead. Because right there in my flashlight stood something at the side of my camper. Now I say something because, as I said, I have seen almost every animal on the North American continent. I'm not bragging, it's just true. I've seen Kodiak bears way too close for my comfort. I almost lost my life once to a bull moose in rutting season that charged our hunting camp up in Canada. You name an animal found on the North American continent, and I bet you I've seen it out in the wild at one point or another. Except this. Now this animal, this creature, I have only ever seen it in books. Now as a kid, I had a fascination for all things cryptid, the Loch Ness Monster, the Mothman, and of course, the big daddy of them all, Bigfoot. But that fascination faded as I grew older, and eventually I had put it right up there with unicorns and leprechauns. But I knew instantly that what I was looking at was a genuine Bigfoot. It was easily 7.5 feet, maybe 8 feet tall. It was standing with its side to me. It was trying to look in the other open window over the little table inside the camper. I could see that it seemed to be sniffing, its face pressed up almost against the screen. Then I knew. The fish. I had bagged the fish and iced them down in a great big cooler. A cooler which was now sitting on the bench seat of the little dining nook directly under the window where the Bigfoot stood. The cooler was closed, though, but I guess it still smelled it somehow. It was the only thing that made sense in that instant in my head. Heck, I'd give it the fish if it would just go away and let me get in my camper. Now, I know how to handle almost any animal, but I had no clue with this one. Would yelling scare it off or make it aggressive? Was it aggressive by nature? I had no idea. I tried to remember everything I had ever read as a kid, but I couldn't recall reading anything about the known nature or habits of the creature other than it is supposedly nocturnal and shy. So for the first time ever, I didn't know how to handle an encounter with a creature in close quarters. But it did know I was there. It glanced over at me, and it seemed not to be too pleased to have my flashlight in its face. I saw its nose wrinkle in the middle of the hairy face, and the mouth opened and closed quickly, and then I heard a harsh barking noise. I dropped the light more to the torso area, but not before I saw something malformed on its face. It looked like a puffy old scar, or maybe a current infection that was just under the skin that was swelling up. It ran from what I would call the bridge of the nose downward on the bone under the eye, and then disappeared into the surrounding fur. I was trying to reason through what to do and what not to do as my flashlight lit up the torso area of the creature. I also believe it was male, since I saw no breasts. In the flashlight, the fur was a minky brown color with red highlights and looked short and dull and dirty. I had always thought a Bigfoot was supposed to be massive and muscular, but this one seemed to be a little on the skinny side, despite its overall tall frame. It just looked gaunt. It wasn't muscular. Maybe it was sick, I thought. At that moment, I remember telling myself, stay calm. Panicking never helps in this kind of situation. And then my brain snapped back. How the heck would I know? I've never been in this situation. There was another whistling sound from beyond my camper, and though it was not as intense, I instantly recognized this as what had awakened me from my sleep. Almost immediately, the Bigfoot in front of me sent back 2 loud, sharp whistles. Now, I didn't know what this meant, but I didn't like the sound of it. I also didn't like knowing it had a friend out there somewhere. The Bigfoot in front of me hesitated for just a moment after it whistled. Then it turned in my direction. It began chattering low at me. At least, I think it was chattering. It could have been some kind of a warning sound. Again, I had no way of knowing. Then it stopped abruptly. No more chattering, which was almost scarier than when it was chattering. The next noise I heard sounded as if it was coming from deep within its chest. It wasn't very loud. It was the way a cat's purr can echo in its chest. You hear it, but it's not loud. It was like that. And again, it didn't sound like purring. I don't know how to describe it. Then suddenly, the Bigfoot was moving. Yes, moving. Moving in my direction. I was less than the length of my truck and half the length of my camper away from it when it started moving, and I had no time to react. No, really, it moved so fast and covered that distance in just a couple steps, and there I stood frozen with my flashlight, and I couldn't react. Truly, it was incredibly fast, but it wasn't running. It walked right past me, though, but close enough that I swear I not only felt the air move, I swear that some of its fur brushed my arm. I was waiting to be knocked down, to be attacked, to be hit, something. But that didn't happen. As soon as I registered it had passed me, I turned around with the flashlight and watched its back as it headed into the trees. I think I stood there breathing hard for maybe just a few moments. Then I realized I was standing out there like I was, completely unprotected. I realized how useless both my flashlight and the bat were. I made my way into the camper, and I got my Glock G5 out. Yes, I know that would be very little protection against an animal that large. I'm a hunter, and I well know that I'd have to be a perfect shot multiple times and hit vital organs or the brain in multiple succession to take it down. But I didn't come to Lake Vesuvius to hunt animals. I was here to fish. My Glock was there to protect me from malicious humans, not animals. And for the record, I had never encountered anything like that in all the years I've gone to Lake Vesuvius. Anyway, just having the Glock in my hand made me feel better. After a second, I remembered I had a cell phone, and I picked up my cell phone, and I thought about calling a ranger, the police, or someone. And this might sound silly to some of you, but I felt like I had a reputation to protect. You see, over the years, I have seen the same rangers over and over and over, and many times we have swapped hunting stories. And trust me, you want to be friends with those rangers. You do not ever want them thinking that you're one of those people that have gone around the loony bin. So I put the cell phone down. It seemed like the crisis was over, right? No, I have handled every other danged critter I've come across, I thought. I can handle this one too, if it comes back. So I thought again about what little I did know about Bigfoot. Okay, I know it whistles, I know it's incredibly fast, and I know it doesn't like the light in its face. I know it has a keen sense of smell, and apparently it likes fish. It wasn't much, but it was something to go on. I sat there thinking thoughts like that for a few minutes. I'm not sure how long. And then suddenly, I felt a hard thump on the side of the camper. It came from the side facing the trees. I was up off the bed instantly, but I had barely made it to my feet when the whole camper began to rock slightly. I yelled for it to stop, and it did for a moment. Then I heard that weird chattering from outside, and my ear suddenly picked up two distinct voices, if you want to call them that. They were in a very different pitch, and sometimes I could tell they overlapped each other. So I thought, there's more than one out there. And I heard the whistling noise again and again and again, and they were close. I edged up to the window, facing over into the trees which the Bigfoot had previously retreated to. Now, I didn't shine the light out there, but I didn't have to. I was pretty sure I could detect movement out there, and I could see for certain there was more than one shape. Now came another hard push on the camper, and it was with enough force that I had to grab hold of the table. This was ridiculous, I thought. What is it? Is it angry at me? I looked over at the outline of the cooler sitting on the bench, and I knew what it wanted, or at least thought I knew what it wanted. Several sharp thumps came against the camper again. If it wasn't all dented and cracked to pieces by now, my camper sure was going to be, I thought. As a last ditch, I opened the cooler. The ice had begun to melt, of course, but the fish in the bags were fine. I tore open the bag with the fish in it. I had a crazy idea, I know. This is another thing that I've thought back about. I should have done this differently. But I straightened up from the cooler, had the fish in my hand, and I noticed now it was eerily quiet outside. I edged my way over to the door, opened it quietly, and tossed the big plastic bag with the 4 fish in it out as fast as I could. Then I pulled the door shut. I pressed my flashlight up against the window on the door, and I could see that at least 2 of the fish had skidded out of the bag when it hit the ground. Then I saw it. I'm pretty sure it was the same one I saw earlier, although I couldn't see the face or the scar, to be sure. But the body looked scraggly and thin. I watched as it squatted, and it picked up the fish, putting one between its teeth and carrying off the other 3. It stood up, and while I was mindful to keep the flashlight off its face, I could see its body was turned directly toward the camper. I heard that chattering again. Then it walked toward the other end of the camper, I assumed to go around it to the trees. Well, I thought, that's over. But no, here came a few more loud whacks to the side of the camper before all really did finally go quiet. I looked at the little clock on the kitchen radio under a cabinet. It was a little after 4 a.m. I sat down on the bed, waiting for another slap, but mostly waiting for sunrise. I definitely wasn't staying another night, that's for sure, and I definitely wasn't going out there now to try to get things ready to pull out of here. As I sat there, I thought over a lot of things as I waited for the sunrise. Mostly, I thought about how absurd this was going to sound to anyone who I told this to. But the more and more I thought about it, I really got the feeling that was one sick Bigfoot, and I guess that was why it didn't go on down to the lake to get its own fish. I also had the thought that maybe the other one I never saw might have been even sicker, and maybe it needed that fish too. I thought of 100 things, and nothing seemed quite right, and all of them just as absurd as the other. And I know that any of you listening, or at least a lot of you, are wondering why I didn't get the cell phone and take a picture or a video. Well, most of that time, I had to pick and choose what I was holding in my hands. And let me tell you, I consistently chose to hold the gun and the flashlight. Now, you might have chosen differently, and that's okay. It's real easy to Monday morning quarterback me. Heck, I've been Monday morning quarterbacking myself. But more on my movements while I was outside the camper than about whether or not I should have gotten a video or a picture. Nance, I'm just going to close with this. I have hunted, camped, and hiked all over North America, as I've mentioned. I'm not bragging, as I said. I'm just going to say that in all that time, I never once thought about Bigfoot. It never crossed my mind. And if I had thought about it, I would have been more convinced that I would see one in Canada or Alaska or somewhere like that. Ohio wouldn't have been the place I thought in all the world I would see a Bigfoot. The other thing is, I know people wonder how it is Ohio could have a Bigfoot population. I've thought a lot about that, and I'm going to tell you my thoughts on that. I think they're just like all the other animals. This is where they have been for thousands of years, and like deer and fox and all the other animals that we have encroached upon with our incessant building, well, a few of them are hanging on wherever they can, wherever they find some dense forests and enough food. Forests that are now like islands that have them trapped in the ocean of human civilization. Well, that's my thoughts anyway. I still go to Lake Vesuvius, but for what it's worth, if I do catch fish, I always leave the cooler outside. If something wants it that badly, it can have it. And after 3 years, nothing has ever bothered my coolers again. Thanks for listening and letting me tell this. Ron.